See the birds and how they fly so free. They had to fall off to strengthen their wings. I know it seems like your pain is in vain, but you're gonna come out of this and rise again. But it won't happen overnight. You have to go through the darkness only to see the light. Your situation's only a moment in time, but after your transformation, you'll be ready to fly.
So one of the reasons why I'm speaking to you today is because I believe that to create a sustainable world, we need to understand ourselves. What makes us thrive? What makes us feel connected? And I'd argue that taking ourselves out of our comfort zones can be the best way to answer these questions and bring that insight back to our communities to support the change we want to see. And for me, understanding answers to those questions came after walking thousands of miles, or what is generally referred to as through hiking. So we all know that the process of walking forces us to be really present and absorb the landscape and everything around us. And maybe we might have had this experience on vacation, or maybe if we've been to Europe, but my vision for urban hiking is to take that spirit and principles of backpacking that I used on long trails and to bring that to the city right here where we live. So 2 years after I set the speed record on the Appalachian Trail, I was invited to urban backpack my first city, which is Los Angeles. And I was actually living in Colorado at the time, so that was a much bigger deal to come out here. And the route was designed to have about the same mileage and elevation gain as the John Muir Trail, which is this famous long distance wilderness trail in the Sierra. I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but even though I went to school here, I didn't know a lot about Los Angeles before I did that hike. And after I finished, I found myself in a position where I really cared about the places I'd been and the people who lived there and wanted to learn more about the neighborhoods and the history. And urban hiking really normalized walking for me as a form of transportation. We all know LA is infamously one of the most car-centric cities in the country, yet during my day-to-day on that route, walking felt normal. And it felt like as a walker, I was reclaiming a landscape for exploration. So I wanted more people to see the city from that same pedestrian vantage point about urban hiking. Walking is a political act, and by choosing to walk in a city instead of drive, or choosing to walk in a city instead of nature, we're making a statement. And it made me realize that a long hike can be a gateway to discussions about local or national issues, and a way to get to know people on the ground level that just isn't possible if you're only visiting communities or certain neighborhoods by car. There are so many outdoor advocates, hikers and bikers and skiers who cover hundreds of miles a year in nature, and maybe we'll talk about public lands, but wouldn't be caught dead walking in their own city. And my question is, how do we change that? The more people who think of being a pedestrian as on par with other forms of transportation, the more people who think of being a pedestrian as cool or something they would want to do in their free time or on vacation, then the more likely we'll see decisions and funding valuing sustainable cities, like we're trying to do in Claremont. And we know walkable cities benefit everyone who lives here, whether or not they have the option to use other forms of transit or not. And that's why one of my most recent projects has, kind of COVID related also, has been to walk to every street that's open to the public in Claremont, which is my own photography, so it's not nearly as good. And as we all know, there's a lot of different communities and cultures here in Claremont, and Padua Hills and South Claremont can feel very far apart, very disparate culturally, racially, geographically, socioeconomically. But I found that no matter what city I'm in, when I walk through a new neighborhood by foot, something changes in my head mentally. And realizing that very different places, very different people are all within walking distance of each other can open minds and change perspectives. Even in a city like New York with economic divides, racial divides, when we travel between disparate neighborhoods on foot, suddenly everywhere and everyone feels a bit closer. Walking makes us vulnerable, and with it, it becomes easier to see that we have things in common as a community and as a people. And when we think about cities, it's really easy to other the folks who live on the other side of town, or think that whatever folks on that side of town are experiencing is out of my hands or not my problem or something the police should deal with. But when you walk there by foot, you realize that folks across town, their businesses, their dreams, their families, their churches are all within walking distance of your world too. And you remove that bubble of the car and you're shed down to that authentic version of yourself. Just like when I'm only carrying a backpack on a trail, I'm back down to that authentic version of myself. And whether we're hiking in nature or in the city or a suburb or a rural area, it becomes easy to realize that everyone we meet on a hike has similar goals: to raise our kids in a world that is better than ours, and to have a chance at advancement and dignity in a safe environment. So lastly, people ask me, Liz, you're a super user of pedestrian infrastructure, over 30 miles a day walking. What little things are you noticing that make a difference? And what can we do to encourage more people to get out there and explore? What should we put our resources in that actually matter? So my answer is to keep doing what you're doing here at Sustainable Claremont, planting trees with the Green Crew, having dialogues about things like parking and walkability, and thinking locally about how to combat local climate change. And I'll just say the word local again, because that's such an important part of combating climate change. Also, as you can see, urban hiking is trending as people want to approach their own cities with awe. Especially trending, of course, during 2020, when we haven't necessarily been able to travel as much. And we see that in Claremont now, and we also can ensure Claremont continues to be a model of a walkable city ripe for exploration. So some of the things to get people walking safely: my urban hikes are hands down the most dangerous thing that I do. A car is a lot more dangerous than a grizzly bear. And to get more people walking, it isn't just a function of how close or far away a grocery store or a school is, which is measured by the walkability score. It's how safe or pleasant or shady that walk is in between. Does a busy street like Foothill have sidewalks on both sides and crosswalks that don't require adding 10 or 20 minutes to your walk just to cross at the legal spot? Another question is, how fast are cars going? Another thing is creating dedicated bikeways and walkways and sidewalks, breaking down geographic barriers. Here in Claremont, we have the 210, railroad tracks, Baseline, Foothill, and these geographic barriers create mental barriers that are a lot bigger than just the 100 feet that these roads occupy. When we make crossing those connections on foot easier, we not only create a safer city, but a way to reconnect communities. And of course, things that are really important are shade and drinking fountains. And trees is something Claremont has been really, really great at, as we know. And recognizing that when we build a human-powered transit system, that preventing dehydration and overheating is an important part of that. And it's an important incentive to get people out of their cars. My last suggestion is to see for yourself. If you really want to learn about a community and its priorities, if you really want to battle climate change and see how to do it locally here in Claremont, if you really want to meet your neighbors and see some fun art, I challenge you to commit to taking all trips less than a mile from your foot by home. And this is something called the 1 Mile Walk or Bike Challenge. And let me show you some of the things that I've seen on my walks in Claremont. I learned about the 1 Mile Walk or Bike Challenge from another climate advocate. And what I learned from making this commitment myself is the importance of building businesses and amenities close to where people live, or the flip side is building homes close to businesses. Where I live in Claremont, there isn't a grocery store within a mile of my house, just a liquor store. And by walking the 1 Mile Challenge, it made me ask questions like, what would it be like if I could walk to a food co-op in the village to get my groceries instead of using my fossil fuel burning vehicle? Or what if more zoning allowed for shops and homes to be put on the same street, or empty lots to become neighborhood cafes or gyms or markets? And the process of walking to locations within 1 mile of my home in Claremont taught me how our cities are built to prioritize cars. But walking also lets us reimagine a world where the city is built for human-powered, zero-emission transportation and convenience for children and also our aging population that won't be driving cars. So lastly, I'd like to share my vision for urban hiking, that it becomes a way that we can build communities within our city. Now, we all know it's easier to stop and talk with someone when we're both on foot than if we're in cars. But it's these happenstance experiences we have walking out our door, talking to our neighbors, discovering gardens and front yard art, shopping at local businesses that build community. And these random encounters are how strangers change into neighbors, neighborhoods become more than just a place we live, and communities become something we want to be part of. We have choices how we design communities, but how and where we spend our free time is also a choice. And it's those choices that make cities more livable, desirable, and sustainable. So my last question for you is, what can we do in Claremont to attract more people to explore their own neighborhoods? How can we get residents thinking of walking with awe and excitement as something that can happen here at home in Claremont, not just when we're on vacation, not just when we're abroad? Are we encouraging people to ask questions like, what's on the other side of Claremont? Who lives on the other side of Claremont? And finding out the answer to that on foot, meeting people where they are. So I do realize that urban hiking is extreme, but the goal of what I do is to inspire everyone to get out and explore their town with awe. People who recreate in their city, either as residents exploring or as tourists, become aware of a city's infrastructure. And the experience of getting out and walking for fun in a city turns everyday people into pedestrian advocates. Making pedestrian infrastructure safer and more pleasant for urban hikers also benefits so many people who aren't walking for fun, but because they have no choice, in addition to helping with climate change. So, of course, walkable cities aren't created by magic. Just as conservationists, land managers, and government agencies come together to build trails in wilderness, it takes planners, local officials, and advocates like you working every day to make our communities walkable and more sustainable.